In this lecture, we will talk about how we can list all the profiles, custom objects, APIs classes, or any other metadata with the help of our Metadata API. So here is the scenario for us. The number one scenario which we are going to use is we need to display all the details about the profiles that are available in your Salesforce org. So you might be thinking that we can use SQL query to get the profile details. That is correct. But when we use SQL query to fetch the profile details, it only gives us the label of a profile. It does not give us the API name, the exact API name of that profile. And whenever we are working with Metadata API, we most of the time needed the API name for that every metadata. That might be our profile, your custom object, your APIS class, or a component, Lightning Web Component bundles, custom metadata, or any other component that you are trying to use. So that is why we use this approach to get all the list of the profiles. We will also see how we can get the list of all the custom objects, APIS classes and all. To get started with that, we have to follow these three steps which are very easy for us. So before we start with the first step, let me quickly remind you that whenever we are working with any API, that might be your external API which we are consuming, or if we are even consuming Salesforce REST API itself, the very first step is we need to prepare the connection between those, either using some sort of access token if we are considering the external API, and whenever we are considering the Salesforce API, which might be REST or SOAP or metadata, then we have to use the session ID. So the very first step is to set up the connection or maintain the connection. For that, how we can maintain is the metadata service, which is our main class. Inside that class, there is another class which is saying that metadata port. This is the class which is metadata port. And under this class, there are variable like session header, and session header contains a variable which is session ID. And here we need to provide the session ID, and session ID is nothing which is the access token of our user. So in most of the case, suppose that we are using admin user. So instead of using user info.get session ID, we can use that session ID over here, the access token ID for that user. Once we are done with the connection, the next thing that we need to do is prepare a query. So whenever we are trying to list any record, we are trying to list any metadata with the help of a query, even a SQL query, we need to prepare the query, right? So for that, we have another class which is list metadata query. This is kind of a generic class which we can use for any kind of multiple metadata. And then we just need to provide what kind of metadata we wanted to query. It is either profile, custom object, Apex trigger, Apex class, or any other component. And then once we are done with this query, we need to execute the query, and where we need to provide this list metadata is a method which accepts two parameter, list of this list of our metadata service dot list metadata query class object, and the API name of our Salesforce environment which we are using to get that metadata. So it might be 25, 26, and the maximum which is currently working, that is API number 50. So we can use that. Now let's quickly talk about the first, second and third steps in our Salesforce environment. So we quickly talked about the first step, which was setting up the connection. So if you have opened your class, you can just open your class and then find the metadata port, which is the first class which we talked about. So this is the class, and under this class, if you have noticed that we have got this metadata service dot session header element, which is again a session header. So you might be seeing here, let me zoom it. Yeah, now you can see here metadata service is again our parent class, and this is the new class which we have, session header element. So if we can do the control C and control F and control V, we find this session ID. That means under this class we need to provide a variable called session ID, and that session ID must be either the current user session ID, the another user session ID, or the custom access token. So we have opened here inside our Salesforce environment, we have a class called metadata util, and under that class we created a method which is doing nothing, which is just creating the service of using that metadata port in order to build a connection, and then adding the current user session ID as a session header. And that is what we have got here. So this is something we have got here. And why we have created a separate method, so that we can use this method inside all the practical things that we are going to do. Okay, and then next we have this list metadata is a method that I have created for this lecture and the purpose of this lecture itself. Now here you can see that we have got a metadata port service, and we are calling this method which is create service, that is returning the object of metadata service dot metadata port, and we are storing inside a variable called service. And then as we know that we are going to query some sort of metadata, what we did is we prepared the list of metadata query, list metadata query object, and here we are preparing that query. Here we can have multiple type. Okay, for now I'm just accepting a single parameter which is type X. Okay, it can be either profile or custom object, apex trigger, apex class. It can be anything, whatever you pass while calling that method. And then in these queries we are adding all this. So if you might have multiple, suppose that I'm just adding one more here, and instead of type X uh, putting dynamically, I'm just saying that custom objects. Okay, and it is say that custom objects, and I can add it over here as well. So I can just copy paste the same line one more time and then add these over here. So now what we had is, now we have two metadata which we are querying. One is the metadata we are going to pass while calling the method, and then other one is custom objects. And as we know that there is one method we just talked about, list metadata, which is only for querying the records, listing the records. So if you want to know that, you can just quickly copy and paste list metadata like this, and this is the method. You can see here this method is returning the metadata service dot file properties, which is again a list. So you can just go to this file properties class and then find these are all the options that you have created by ID, what is full file name, what is full name, what is the ID, last modified by ID, modified at a, last modified date. So you can find multiple things about that in that particular metadata that you are trying to get. So once we have prepared that, we are just storing those into a list and then iterating with that list, printing the full name. If you wanted to print the ID, as we have seen that we have ID as well, so we can say here we have got ID, so we can say that file property dot ID, and then we save it. So this is pretty simple to use metadata API. We just need to find out what we actually are going to do and what it takes, and what are all the related classes that are there inside metadata service. So this is list metadata. This time I'm going to pass apex class, because we know that custom object is already there, and type X is going to be assigned to this apex class because we are passing here, and then we are going to execute it. And this time, sorry, we got some error. But the reason why we are getting error is we are using profile at both places, so we should be using custom objects here instead of profile. So now we have got profile, we have got custom object, we added over here, and this we can say that generic metadata, because this is something we are getting from the variable of our method, which is type X. So instead of using profile, I said that generic metadata. And then after saving this, we can just quickly use the same, execute this, and this time it should work. Yep, it is working. It is going to open us the debug log. So we have got 223, we have got these are the objects along with their IDs, and then if you scroll down, these are the some custom objects, some standard objects, and we know that there is one class which is LinkedIn util. So we can just filter those and we can see that there is an object, the LinkedIn util is a class, token is a class. So that is how we can list all these details, and then we can store if you wanted to. We can send them to our we can say lightning components, and then we can display as a drop down there. From there, whatever we can do that. So this is it for our very first lecture of metadata API, and then in the next lecture we will talk about how we can read a particular metadata and what is the significance of using a read metadata method of our metadata pod class.